Red and blue lights pulsed across my driveway in a chaotic dance, washing over the glossy surface of my Lamborghini like a storm. Just a few feet away, 17-year-old Brandon Miller was being handcuffed, his wrists pinned behind his back as he shouted himself hoarse. His voice cracked with indignation as he bellowed about his rights, how his mother would sue everyone in sight, and how the officers would lose their jobs for daring to touch him. Meanwhile, I stood quietly beside my bright yellow Lamborghini Huracan, calmly walking the lead officer through the chain of events that led to this moment. Neighbors began pouring out of their houses like moths drawn to a porch light, gathering in clusters along the sidewalks, whispering in shock. It wasn't every day the golden boy of Karen Miller, our iron-fisted HOA president, got himself arrested right here on Willowbrook Drive. People peered through windows, phones in hand, recording snippets of the drama. Their murmurs carried a mix of disbelief and something that almost sounded like vindication. 3 months earlier, none of this chaos had been part of my dream. Back then, I had pulled into Willowbrook Estates filled with nothing but excitement, and a deep pride in the gleaming Lamborghini I'd worked years to afford. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets, emerald green lawns trimmed with surgical precision, freshly power-washed sidewalks, and an air of calm, suburban serenity. My tech consulting business had finally taken off, and buying both my dream home and my dream car felt like the ultimate reward for years of long nights and sacrifices. The first few weeks were everything I had hoped for. Every morning I'd sip my coffee and admire how that yellow Lamborghini looked parked in the center of my circular driveway, a burst of color against the tidy backdrop of manicured hedges. Life felt complete. And then Karen Miller knocked on my door. It was a Tuesday morning. She showed up wearing a cream blazer and carrying a leather portfolio so stiff and official, it may as well have come with a gavel. Karen was in her late 40s, with immaculately styled blonde hair and a practiced smile that looked like it had been ironed on. She introduced herself as the HOA president with all the warmth of a tax audit, her gaze never straying far from my car. She made a few polite remarks about how the Lamborghini was quite a statement piece in a quiet community like ours. Then came the suggestion, thinly veiled as neighborly advice, that perhaps I should consider keeping it in my garage to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic. I remember closing the door that morning with an uneasy laugh, not realizing it was the opening shot of a war I never asked for. What started as subtle disapproval escalated fast. Within 2 weeks, I received my first official HOA warning, a typed letter on crisp letterhead bearing Karen's looping signature at the bottom. It cited some vague clause about vehicles that might disturb the community's peaceful atmosphere. When I pulled up the actual bylaws, the clause was so broad it could have been applied to anything brighter than beige. I decided to ignore it, assuming she'd eventually find someone else to bother. I couldn't have been more wrong. Karen went from passive-aggressive to full-blown crusader. Letter after letter arrived. Noise complaints, allegations of speeding, warnings about the car drawing unwanted attention. And with each letter came a fine. $50 at first, then $100, creeping toward $200 like clockwork. That was when I started noticing Brandon. He was always nearby during our heated driveway exchanges, leaning against a fence, earbuds dangling, a smirk etched on his face. He was tall, lanky, and carried himself with the smugness of someone who thought the world belonged to him. It was obvious he'd grown up believing his mother's title gave them power over everyone else. And to him, I was the perfect target, the outsider with the flashy car. The situation boiled over on a heavy, humid Thursday in late August. I was outside rinsing soap off the Lamborghini when Brandon swaggered up alone for the first time. His chest was puffed out, chin tilted skyward like he owned the place. There was no greeting. No preamble. Hand over the keys, he demanded flatly. I froze, unsure if I'd heard him right. He went on to declare that since his mother ran the HOA, she technically owned everything in the community, including, apparently, my car. For a split second, I just stared at him, blinking. Then I burst out laughing. I explained slowly and clearly that being HOA president didn't give anyone legal ownership over residents' personal property. Brandon's face flushed bright red, his jaw tightening as my laughter echoed down the street. His hands balled into fists as he shouted that I'd regret ever disrespecting his family. In that moment, I didn't know it yet. But this wasn't just some brat throwing a tantrum. It was the spark that would set everything else on fire. Brandon stormed off toward his house, but not before spinning on his heel and yelling back at me, his face twisted in teenage fury. "You have no idea what my mom can do when someone crosses her!" he screamed, the words echoing down the quiet street. The threat hung in the humid night air long after he disappeared behind his front door. At 2:30 a.m. that same night, a faint scraping noise outside snapped me out of sleep. Living alone had made me hypersensitive to sounds like that. My pulse spiked immediately. I grabbed my phone, heart thudding in my chest, and pulled up the security camera feed I'd installed precisely because of Karen's endless harassment. The image on the screen sent an icy wave through me. Brandon was crouched beside my Lamborghini, a crowbar in one hand and a screwdriver in the other, fumbling with the handle like he was cracking open a safe. He was clumsy but determined, and under the dim streetlight I could see fresh scratches forming along the door where he'd been prying. My hands trembled as I dialed 911 and whispered to the dispatcher that someone was trying to steal my car. "Units are on the way," she assured me. "Stay inside and keep eyes on him if you can." I watched through the cameras as Brandon grew more frantic with every passing second. The Lamborghini's advanced security system wasn't giving in, and frustration began to twist his face. He kept glancing back at his house, maybe hoping his mother would swoop in and fix the mess he'd made. But her windows stayed dark. Clearly, this little operation was his idea alone. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for, the rising wail of approaching sirens slicing through the night. Brandon froze like a deer in headlights, scanning the street wildly. But instead of running, he made the spectacularly stupid choice to double down. He gripped the crowbar tighter and attacked the door again. More desperate now. The first patrol car rounded the corner with its spotlight blazing, catching him fully exposed beside my car, tools in hand. "Drop it! Step away from the vehicle!" The officer's voice boomed through the neighborhood. The next few moments played out like a bad sitcom. Brandon raised his hand slightly, but immediately started shouting over the officers. He barked about how his mother ran the HOA, how this was family property, and how they were making a huge mistake. He tried to wrap his attempted car theft in the language of power and entitlement, as if the badge of HOA president's son carried some kind of legal immunity. The lead officer, an older guy with graying temples, looked utterly unimpressed. Clearly, this wasn't his first rodeo with an entitled teenager. Within minutes, Brandon was on his knees with his hands behind his back, cuffs clicking into place. I stepped outside, staying behind the line they marked out, and handed over the live camera footage that captured the whole thing. That was when Karen appeared. Robe, slippers, hair frizzed from sleep, but eyes blazing with outrage. She rushed toward the scene, shouting at the officers to release her son immediately. Her voice rang through the cul-de-sac, dripping with self-importance. "This is harassment," she screamed. "You have no idea who I am." But when the officers calmly explained the situation and pointed out the evidence, the tools, the footage, the damage, her tirade pivoted on a dime. Suddenly, she claimed I was the real villain. According to her warped version of events, I had intentionally parked my car in the driveway to tempt her son into committing a crime. She even accused me of entrapment. The officers remained calm and professional. One of them finally said, "Ma'am, attempted grand theft auto is a felony. That's not something we overlook because someone doesn't like where a car is parked." Within 48 hours, the charges were official. Attempted grand theft auto, criminal mischief, and destruction of property. The estimate to repair the deep scratches on my Lamborghini exceeded $3,000, enough to elevate the property damage to felony status. Karen, of course, lawyered up immediately, hiring an expensive attorney and spewing threats of countersuits and defamation claims. But the footage didn't lie. Brandon had been caught on camera in the act, holding the tools himself. No amount of spin or intimidation could change that. The fallout was brutal and fast. Neighbors, People who'd spent years tiptoeing around Karen's iron rule began to speak up. One by one, they shared their own stories of her abuse of power, of Brandon's escalating aggression, of the toxic atmosphere she had created in Willowbrook Estates. The HOA board called an emergency session. For once, Karen didn't control the narrative. The vote of no confidence was decisive, 8-1. Her lone no vote came from herself. Then the local news got wind of the story. HOA president's son arrested in attempted Lamborghini theft became headline fodder overnight. Karen's employer, a prestigious law firm downtown, quietly pushed her out. No client wanted their name associated with this circus. Brandon's case moved through the courts quickly. In the packed courtroom, the judge read the verdict with clinical finality: 18 months in juvenile detention and full restitution for the damage. When the sentence was announced, Karen let out a raw, guttural wail that filled the room. Her perfect suburban mask cracked in front of everyone. By then, her carefully crafted image had disintegrated. 3 families filed civil suits against her for harassment. The HOA board stripped her of every position she held. The law firm she once bragged about dropped her like a stone. As the bailiff led Brandon away in shackles, Karen turned to me, her eyes blazing with a venomous hatred she could no longer act on. Her reign of petty terror, built on threats, fear, and mailbox regulations, was finally over. All that remained was the cold reality she could no longer manipulate. Her son was behind bars, her reputation destroyed, and her kingdom reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale.